to ProlesPod.
Hello, and welcome to ProlesPod, your bi-weekly dose of history, politics, and culture without the liberalism. You can find and follow us on most social media platforms at ProlesPod and on TikTok at Proles.pod. If you want to help us reach more people, leaving 5-star reviews on any of the various podcast catchers is the best way to do that. If you want to help us with our vision, you can subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/ProlesPod. There's a lot of great stuff there, such as early access to main feed episodes, bonus episodes, theory beats, study guides, raffles, surprise drops, and more, with more on the way. This episode is brought to you by Soviet Winnie the Pooh. Today, we're going to be talking about Soviet children's media. But first, who do we have with us today?
It's the people's husband, Martin.
And I'm Ray.
So as everyone knows, this is Tony. I am the host of Actually Existing Socialism. And when I find the time to do so, I do some work with ProlesPod on the side.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel. And today's subject matter expert is none other than RevolutionaryTh0t themselves. They are a communist YouTuber and video essayist here to talk about Soviet children's media with us, specifically Soviet cartoons. So, Thought, where would you like to begin? Why don't you tell us about yourself?
What do I say about myself? All right. Well, I mean, like you said, I'm a communist YouTuber. I grew up in Russia, and then I moved to the United States when I was 7. And I also worked in tech for like 7 years, and then I realized that sucks, and I'd rather make people communist on the internet. So here I am now.
Noble work, doing the Lord's work, truly. So I found you through a video essay that you did about Soviet cartoons. And to sort of like set the scene here so that we can reference them more easily, although I would recommend everyone, please do check out the RevolutionaryTh0t channel on YouTube. Can you lay out some of the plots of your favorite Soviet cartoons?
Sure, yeah. So one of the ones I talk about is Cheburashka. It's just called Cheburashka, but there's a few different Cheburashka cartoons. But this one stars Krokodil Gena and Cheburashka, and they try to join the pioneers, who are basically child communists, right? Like they're literally the little kids that were basically like Boy Scouts, but for building socialism in the Soviet Union. They get
way better than Boy Scouts.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, they get rejected because they don't actually know how to do anything. They can't march, they can't build birdhouses, they can't do any of that. And they end up learning how to contribute to the betterment of the community on their own. They build a playground for the kids, they collect scrap metal, and then in the end, they get accepted to the pioneers. I think that one's really, I mean, they're all really great. That one's really fun because I feel like the fact that it kind of glorifies trial and error is really fun and really reminiscent of the Soviet Union's industrialization drive, because there was a lot of trial and error during that time. And there's also 3 from Простоквашино, which is about a kid who meets a cat. And when his mom won't let him keep the cat, he just leaves with the cat to an abandoned village. He's like, you know what, Mom? I'm my own boy. I'm leaving. He ends up meeting with a dog in the village, and they all move together into this abandoned house. They clean it up. They find some buried treasure so the kid doesn't have to engage in child labor. And then they meet the village mailman. And that part's really funny because the cat's like, what are you, a cop? Based, incredibly based. And the parents are super worried about their son, even though he communicated to them that he was leaving. Like, he wrote them a letter being like, hey, I'm going to a village. And they put an ad in the paper. The mailman sees the ad and reunites the family. And then everyone lives happily ever after. And there's actually more episodes of Простоквашино. And there's even like a modern day version going on today in Russia, which is wild. I tried to watch a little of it, and it's like the soul is not there, the Soviet soul. And what other cartoons are there? There's Bremensky Muzikanty. I kept mispronouncing this in my video, and I got a lot of comments that are like, I thought you spoke Russian until you mispronounced Bremensky or Bremensky. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce a German word because I don't respect the German language. But anyway, that one's about a troubadour and his group of traveling musician animal friends. They stop by this town to perform. The troubadour falls in love with the princess, but while he and his animal friends are doing some like tricks and like stacking themselves on top of each other, they fall into the king's palace, break some windows, and get kicked out of town because apparently you can't just do that.
Frowned
The
upon.
troubadour wants to get the troubadour wants to get closer to the princess, which they do by kicking out some bandits who were actually going to kidnap the king and rob him, take their cabin. They kidnap the king while disguised as these bandits, and then pretend to save him while out of disguise. So the troubadour gets invited back to the palace, but the animals are kept out because I guess they don't allow animals in the palace. It's very sad. And he gets together with the princess. They end up together in the end, but at the end, the end scene is basically the animals think that the troubadour has abandoned them, so they leave. But as they're singing their friendship song, the troubadour shows up with his amazing lung capacity and is right there singing right beside them, and it's very cute, very friendship. And then there's also Tajna Tretьей Planety, Mystery of the Third Planet, which is about it's like a space mystery adventure type thing, and it's a trio consisting of Professor Selesnyov, his daughter Alisa Selesnyova, and then Captain Zelenyy, which means green, who are called to fly around the galaxy looking for rare animals for the Moscow Zoo. But they end up involved in this space mystery because the director of this museum that they go to is acting very suspicious. They find out that he's like killing all of this type of bird called the gavarun, which basically just means like chatterer, like talking bird. They keep like seeing this guy everywhere. They're like, what is he doing on all these planets? And why is he acting so suspicious? He's literally a museum director. They're given the last living gavarun bird by an alien who they find out is one of these famous captains, Captain Kim, and they have to follow the bird's instruction to find the captains who the bird says are on the third planet. On their way to the third planet, they stop by a planet that only has robots to help them out because they were hit with an epidemic after the same exact museum director showed up. They stop by this beautiful surrealist planet with stones that project mirages of what they've seen, and then they end up on the third planet where the team gets trapped by space pirates, but also find that the captain, Captain Kim, is trapped with them. And then Alisa and the Gavarun escape from the trap, end up finding the other captain, Captain Buran, and another version, like another museum, like the same guy, but it's actually the real guy. And through the power of teamwork and solidarity, they save the day. And we learn that this museum director that was going around killing birds was actually like a creature that's able to mimic the appearance of others and not the actual museum director. And yeah, they live happily ever after. Everything's solved. And I think those are basically the 4 cartoons that I've talked about on my channel. There's obviously way more, but those are my top 4 favorites for sure.
So I highly recommend people check out the video. The video is titled "What Soviet Cartoons Teach Us About Socialism," because I found myself like loving each of those cartoons that you talked about. I was like, man, I would have loved this I love this now, so I would have loved it even more as a kid, kind of thing, right? The message behind each story, the animation, the kind of like goofiness and even surrealness that you talked about. Could you tell us what inspired you to make that video? Like, why did you have this desire to talk about socialist cartoons specifically?
I think a big part of it was that, like, I grew up with these cartoons, obviously. They were a really big part of my childhood. And when I think about media made under socialism versus media made under capitalism, I notice that there's a really big difference and a really big contrast in the way that they portray relationships between characters, the way that stories are told. And I figured it'd be really interesting for people who don't know anything about like Soviet media to learn more about these cartoons that probably wouldn't be accessible to them otherwise. Because I mean, they are available like on YouTube with subtitles, but I don't think people know what to look for. I don't know. Like if they just look up Soviet cartoons, they probably wouldn't know to look exactly for these ones. So that was a big part of it. But also, I just thought it'd be really fun to talk about the cartoons I grew up with and introduce them to people because I love them so much. They're so cute, they're so wholesome, and they just like convey socialist values and socialist morality so beautifully. And I don't know, I just really wanted to share that with people.
Yeah, and thanks for doing that, because actually, so I'm sure after most of our listeners watch your video, they're going to go down a rabbit hole of watching as many Soviet cartoons as they can, because that's exactly what I did. And I got my daughter hooked on the Soviet Winnie the Pooh, which is probably like the cutest cartoon that I've ever seen.
And sponsor of this episode.
Oh, really? Excellent. And so she loves it more so than the we'll call it the
capitalist.
The evil capitalist capitalist pig Pooh that we don't talk about on this show. So after watching your video, I shared it with my family. And my sister had this interesting comment because she was like, these cartoons seem very familiar in a sense. You know, we didn't grow up in the Soviet Union, unsurprisingly, grew up in Canada. And so I was like, maybe there's something to this because there's some aspects of the animation that are familiar. I'm not sure you went down this particular rabbit hole, revolutionary thought, but in regards to the familiarity of some of the animation is due to the fact that many of the 90s cartoons that we all grew up watching, whether that's the Wild Thornberrys, Rugrats, All Real Monsters, these are actually created by people who'd emigrated from the Soviet Union or from the socialist bloc in general. I know, mind blown, right?
That makes a lot of sense, though. Wow, that
is so much better than Operation Paperclip.
Yeah,
exactly. This is like reverse paperclip, yeah. But like, no, there's a very deep connection.
It's like Operation Clippy, a paperclip that actually helped us.
Exactly. So like, there is a very like deep connection to the 90s cartoons that I'm sure most of our listeners grew up listening. And they're kind of, because there's a huge break actually between like, you think about like 80s cartoons like Hanna-Barbera and like He-Man and stuff like that. It's very different than what you get with like Rugrats, right? And the reason is because they were influenced and developed by studios of largely we'll call them ex-Soviet animators.
Whoa, that is really interesting. I actually did not know that, but that makes a lot of sense, especially because after the Soviet Union was illegally dissolved, like all of these animators were probably out of work. Because as far as I'm aware, there wasn't like a ton happening in the animation industry or really like any like cultural thing in the 90s, because it was just kind of a mess in the former Soviet Union.
It also makes sense and kind of maybe it takes us into another question, something that I wanted to touch on, because really, when you think about it, children's media, whether it's a capitalist mode of production or a socialist mode of production, by and large exists. I mean, yes, I guess for entertainment, but like as soft propaganda to promote the values of whatever country that you live in. And the post-Soviet era of the Soviet Union didn't have a kind of vision that you would be trying to share with the next generation in a way that the Soviet Union did. And we can kind of see this in the media project and the cartoons that you're sharing with us today, RT, RevolutionaryTh0t, that are trying to elevate or promote some kind of like socialist realism. And I know that, you know, we talked before this episode about thinking a lot about how the mode of production sort of impacts media representations. And I didn't know if you had ideas about that or thoughts that you wanted to share about that.
The first thing that comes to mind with that is just the concept of base and superstructure. Like the economic base creates an ideological superstructure where that's all, you know, the media, the laws, all the things, right? All the things that isn't the economy. And right. Under capitalism, pretty much all media works to reinforce that capitalist economic base. So even if a cartoon or a movie or any piece of media isn't outright saying like capitalism's great, we love capitalism, it's still going to promote values that are more individualistic, like hyper individualism.
Right.
There's always there's often this trope of like, oh, I'm the chosen one. I have no skills, like no pre-existing skills, but I've been chosen to go on this great journey to defeat evil is often a trope that's used. And also the idea that like there is one big evil to defeat. It's just a very like liberal way of thinking about the world, that like once you defeat the one evil guy, then that's going to save the entire world and everything's good. It's never about the system is harming people or the system is good to people. The system, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really exist. It's like,
right.
It's really all about individuals.
Just making individual choices, and neither the good nor the bad are shaped in any way by their material conditions. They just exist.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, when someone is a good guy, quote unquote, any choice they make is portrayed as good, even if it's not necessarily. And when someone's the bad guy, everything they do is automatically bad. It's some like Marvel ass, like Harry Potter ass morality. It's so weird. Like, I remember when I was a child, I tried reading the Harry Potter books, and in the fourth one, it like starts off with a bunch of fat shaming of Dudley or whatever his name is, but it's just portrayed as like, oh, it's so funny because Harry's the good guy and Dudley, he's evil and also fat. Like, okay, guys, that's what? Where's
J.K. Rowling mass writing?
Yeah, no, for real. It's obviously did not finish that book because apparently child me was very with it. Good job, me. But in terms of like socialist
woke
cartoons,
baby thought.
yeah, I mean, I really was a woke baby thought. Like in the 6th grade, I called a kid an idiot for saying he'd vote for George Bush, and I was like, he just wants to invade Iraq. And look at that, I was right. But
a thought and a prophet.
I do my best. But in socialist cartoons, a lot of the time, and like in socialist media in general, the system is portrayed as a thing that exists. And under a socialist system, like the socialist system is presented as being very good and very helpful. And there's like in Chiburashka, when he and Kakadilgena try to join the pioneers, they're rejected, but they're not like, oh, the system sucks or anything like that. They're just like, oh, okay, well, we'll work on our own thing. And then the system ends up working for them because they get accepted into the pioneers. And also in Chiburashka, there's like a run-in with law enforcement. The police shows up and the cop is like, hey, are you Gena? And Gena is like, yeah. And he's like, did you steal a compressor? And Gena's like, yeah, I did. Whoopsie. And the cop is like, well, what are you going to use it for? And Gena's like, oh, we already used it. We built a playground for the kids. And like the cop looks around, sees the playground, and is like, oh, okay. I can't be mad at you. I can't stay mad. You're good. I'll just take care of this myself. And like takes it and leaves and everything's fine. Like it's very much like the system is working for the people is kind of the message there. Whereas, yeah, like I said, under capitalism, I feel like the system is never really thought about in cartoons, movies, etc.
Right. And when we're freed up from the neoliberal wet dream of everything being all about the individual and the choices that the individual is making or not making, it also opens us up to like different kinds of conflicts, right? It's like in so much of Western media, for example, every conflict is centered on like, I just didn't communicate clearly. And now we have a minimum of 90 minutes of plot and stakes and like manufactured intensity, all to deal with the fact that I just didn't say what I meant. And in none of the cartoons, and this is true also in children's media, it's not just like in adult, I was going to say adult movies. In media that is for adults. And so I think that we also see, right, like different depictions of conflict. It's a very, to use the language that you used in your video essay, it's generative conflict. And the role of conflict is to help people enrich themselves, each other, and their community. And it's not really about like wacky hijinks that we all just get up to because like we're just individuals making our own choices and not able to communicate effectively to other people because we participate in this world as islands.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's one of the things that drives me bonkers about so much of Western media is that it's literally just people being like, yeah, if I communicated this, then we wouldn't have had like 90 minutes of screen time to go over this conflict and solve it. It's so goofy. Oh, yeah.
After watching your video essay, which almost made me cry, or actually made me cry a little, like it's really heartwarming, your essay. I got like also as Tony like into a different rabbit hole, but one that was about socialist media in general. There was this video from Hakim a while ago that was, about like socialist movies, particularly comedies, because like you think Soviet and, like Western media has made a great job of making it seem that there was no comedy or nothing funny in the Soviet Union happening ever, which is actually quite the contrary. So across that rabbit hole, I found myself also seeing from another creator whose name escapes me right now, how during the dissolution of the Soviet Union, all of these animators who like made very experimental films on top of like doing all of the children's media as well, they really liked to complain about, like how confined they were ideologically within the structure of Soviet film, only to find themselves out of work without like any sort of backing when capitalism came in, and like a lot of the experimental things that they were allowed to do and even complain publicly about had no, since they were not profitable in any sense, basically their whole line of work was obsolete. And like connecting back to your essay, what I wanted to know is, do you know about the creators? Like, how are they, like what happened after? Like, where are they now?
Well, apparently a lot of them went to the US, as Tony told us. But yeah, I don't really know a ton about what happened to the creators after, but I'm sure, yeah, like you said, a lot of them were probably out of work, because making media like that, making media that, either supports socialist values or is just surrealist and experimental, is not profitable. There's no like built-in audience, which is also why so many movies nowadays are just remakes or sequels, because there's already a built-in audience, and that's like the most profitable, because you don't have to start from scratch to build an audience, and that's whack. But that's a different topic. But like, yeah, I don't know what happened to them, but I'm sure they were not having a good time, as I don't think anyone was having a good time in the post-Soviet countries in the 90s.
And sadly, now Cherubuska has became IP from beloved from beloved icon to IP with like sequels.
Yeah, it's really weird, actually. A lot of the pretty much all of the cartoons that I talked about at the beginning, that I introduced at the beginning of this episode, like all of those have either like a remake or a sequel that has been made within the past like 5 years in Russia. It's so weird, but because they're literally just trying to profit off of people's like childhood nostalgia. And I mean, because like a lot of us grew up with these cartoons, especially those of us who were born in the 90s, because there was no other cartoons coming out at the time. So the only option we really had was Soviet cartoons, or like Western stuff, or like anime.
I will share one interesting story while we're on this topic of what happened to them. This dude was a Hungarian animator. His name is Gabor Suspo, and he is notably known for creating the Rugrats and stuff like that. But before he worked on the Rugrats, him and a fellow Hungarian animator worked on the Tracey Ullman Show. The Tracey Ullman Show was the essentially the first place the Simpsons started as like a little short as part of the Tracey Ullman Show, right? And so Gabor and his Hungarian comrade, they're working on this show, and they wanted to do something new and experimental. And they're like, you know what? Let's make their skin yellow and their hair blue and stuff, like Marge's hair blue. And they were told like, that's like weird. Like, no, don't do that, because that's not cool. But if you look at Soviet cartoons, like the ones you showed in your YouTube video, it's very colorful. It's very like I don't know how to like explain it, right? It's not like naturalistic. It's going for something else, right? And they brought that to the Simpsons. This iconic Simpsons look originates from this Soviet openness for how to portray things, which is, I think, really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So if you hate the Simpsons, blame socialism, I guess, for that. But yeah,
this is all illegal dissolution of the Soviet Union's fault.
I think if we can... Oh, sorry.
Simpsons socialist psyop confirmed. Oh, sorry.
No, make your joke so we can edit it in at least.
No, but it's listenable.
Because you say it in a funny way, and then you say, oh, sorry, so it doesn't.
Oh. The Simpsons.
That makes it...
The Simpsons socialist psyop confirmed.
It's funnier. It's funnier now.
Whoever edited this is going to have a wild time.
Okay, so just to sort of like round out a thought that I had about socialist realism, something that seems to be very different from what we see in Western media is there's no sort of like, I don't know how to explain this, like cult of spontaneity. I know that you said before, like in this episode, right, like that you were sort of like, it's just a random individual who's sort of like chosen and they don't have any preparation. And I think that that's true. And also, I think that it lends itself to a broader narrative that we see so often in Western media and capitalist media that is really just about like, oh, we're just going to fuck around and find out. And that it really sort of worships this specific skill set of like, oh, a specific opportunity will arise for you that you couldn't have predicted and you couldn't have engineered in any way, and just magically, randomly, it all comes together. This worldview also prizes developing oneself in such a way where you would have like a complete lack of any kind of like organizing skill, any kind of like revolutionary skill, any kind of opportunity to build something that would be like antithetical to, like, as we might say, the powers that be. And that this media that is trying to present a socialist realism actually has people that are like very interested in like, what are the steps? What are the skills I would need to develop? What are the ideas that I would need to have and the tools that I would need and the support that I would need in order to get where I am now to like where I want to go, whether it's like joining, you know, my local organization or building a playground for my neighbors or being out in space. It seems like this media is like really interested in all of the steps that would need to happen for somebody to actually do the thing that they would want, which is like very antithetical to Western media, which is, again, that sort of like cult of spontaneity.
Yeah, absolutely. So much Western media is just like, if I just keep doing random things, then the right thing is going to happen.
Or if I just keep like slogging away in my office, then the boss or like the talent scout or whatever it is, some externalized force will like choose me randomly and then my life will be together. And all I can continue to do is like slave away at my daily obligations without ever thinking about anything, without ever planning toward or moving toward the desires that I have, certainly without ever communicating them to anyone else, right? Again, all Western media is predicated on like none of us can communicate effectively. Then I will, like, this is the path forward.
Yeah, they're like, I'm not going to communicate. I'm just going to think about it really hard. And I'm going to go to the mall and then I'm going to get discovered and be the next top model or something. Yeah, like, God, so much Western media just drives me bonkers with that. Yeah, because they really do convey it as like, if I just keep doing these random things, then the result that I want will magically happen through magic. But yeah, like in Chiburashka, like you said, they get rejected from the pioneers. Okay, well, they're going to get the skills that they need to join the pioneers so they can join the pioneers. That's their goal. They have like a very specific end goal and really specific
and then
steps
the B
that they
plot
take.
is like, oh, there's a problem here. These kids are out just doing crazy ass shit. It's probably because, again, looking at the relationship to their community and their material conditions, like, oh, it's probably because there's like nowhere for them to play. They don't have another option, right? Oh, okay, well, we can make an option for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that sort of storytelling would just never occur to a Western story.
The Western imaginary.
The Western imaginary. Yeah, like the Western imaginary for sure would just, yeah, in the Western imaginary, that would be like totally impossible. Like what they would probably do is just write these kids off as hooligans and be like, these kids are hooligans. We need to fight crime and like fight the hooligans, is I feel like usually what it is. Because there's always like a big emphasis in Western media on like fighting the bad guy, fighting crime, whatever. Whereas in all of these, it's very much not about that. Like Mystery of the Third Planet is probably the closest. And that's literally just because they get embroiled in this space mystery and end up in like having a Gavarun bird in their custody that's like, go to the third planet of the Medusa system. And they're like, I guess we have to do that because this bird literally told us to. And we know it was the captain's bird. And this will probably at least help pry apart this mystery somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not just like, oh, whatever, bird, we'll just do whatever.
Within Harry Potter, where you have the narrative of a bunch of kids who like do consistently break a bunch of rules, there is still this like element of innate gifts. Like Harry is destined by his birth, by the prophecy, to defeat Voldemort. Or Hermione is just an insufferable nerd. And so she's always prepared because she's a fucking nerd. And it can't actually be like, because these people have intentionally developed themselves because they want to, like, as children, organize to like fight this person who is like trying to oppress the magical world and also like his followers, right? It can't be, there's nothing that's deliberate. It's all like destiny and happenstance of like, well, she just happens to be really smart. And like Ron just happens to have a dad who like works in the government, and Harry was literally prophesized to do the thing that he's doing. And so it's just very different when you see this media where it's like, oh, we find a problem and we work together to develop a solution, which, as you said, would just really like fall flat, or at least like capitalist media believes would fall flat for a Western audience.
Yeah, for sure. Oh God, Harry Potter is just so bad, like in retrospect.
So like this might be a counterpoint. I don't know. So it's like, because I have two young kids. So I watch a lot of children's media, like aimed at toddlers specifically. And I would say that there is a lot. I've found myself like, seeing merit in what they do with like children's cartoons today, because I'm assuming that there's some kind of psychological or like science backing to it, right? As in like, working together and developing like self-esteem and developing oneself. I've seen that portrayed in a cartoon nowadays. But I think that goes back to, again, like being very intentional, using like data, like actual science to figure out what is best for children to like be taking in, whatever, right? Which would be what the Soviet Union would have done when they targeted children with their media.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like...
I think actually...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, your first video, Revolutionary Thought, was about like, what if society was like science-backed? I believe that's the first video you have on YouTube. It's a great one, but I think it kind of goes to this point of like, if we are going to create media for children that is useful, then it has to be based in some kind of like psychological understanding of what is best for child rearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Soviets really did strive to be scientific in a lot of ways, although they fell flat at some points. Like they did outlaw homosexuality for a bit. Not that you can do that because people are still going to be gay. But yeah, I think about that often, about what it would look like to just run systems scientifically, because my master's degree is in human factors and ergonomics, which is all about creating systems that, like complex systems that people interact with using what I think us communists would probably know as the mass line, or like just literally like being in constant contact with the people that these policies are going to be, or these systems are going to be impacting, that they're going to be interacting with. If you are creating a system or a piece of media or whatever, there has to be kind of a democratic process to it so that you ensure that people are getting their needs met. And I feel like a lot of people, like the Western imagination, yet again, can't really fathom that, which is really weird to me, especially because many of the UX people and the product designers that I've met, which is the field that I used to work in, can't even fathom applying what they do in the workplace on a larger scale, even though the patterns and some of the principles, some of the usability principles that we know actually can apply to any system of any scale.
Well, that's the dialectic, right, of means and ends, right? If you're a UX designer who's used to thinking about like, okay, I can make this accessible, or I can make this friendly, or I can make this enjoyable, but to what end? And it is like, to keep somebody on a platform, or to increase profits, or right, whatever that end is, it's hard to step back and see that like, oh, as you said, like this could be applied to other ends.
Yeah, like they're always thinking about, oh, how do we make this delightful for users? How do we make a profit? Like you said, because of course, capitalism. How do we make a profit? How do we increase engagement, retention, whatever? But there's so many other metrics or, KPIs or whatever that you can strive towards. It doesn't just have to be...
If we're willing to just ask different questions.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it doesn't have to all be about profit, but alas, in the Western world, that is what we are taught, is that profit is the number one thing. And that's also actually why there's this weird like antagonistic relationship right now with UX and product design and like the rest of the tech industry in a way, because UX relies on being like, hey, I know that this will be profitable, but people aren't going to like this. This is going to decrease user engagement. This is going to decrease retention, whatever. But if the like product manager or the like product leadership or whatever is like, no, but we want to make a profit, then too bad UX, you don't get a seat at the table. It's a whole thing.
Something that Tony said when we're thinking about the kind of information that we're putting sort of like in front of children makes me think now, certainly, and I say this as someone who like is an educator who works with young children, tech and media certainly just like play a role in children's lives. And although it's certainly increasing now, this is not new. And I guess watching your essay, I just started to think about, okay, right, so the critique that we hear so often from right-wingers is that socialism is a sort of like nanny state, which I find incredibly ironic that it's said in a derogatory way, because I actually used to be a nanny. And you know what a nanny does? Well, they like help you with the labor of parenting and child rearing, because it's actually impossible for it to like fall on just like one or two or even like three or four individuals, right? And so the idea that the state would have a role to play in child rearing is seen as some kind of like derogatory thing, even though that's completely ridiculous. And obviously the state does shape our childhoods regardless of the mode of production. But it made me think about, what role does media play in the Soviet family? And how does like a Soviet understanding or conceptualization of the family differ from a Western or like a capitalist understanding of the family?
In the Soviet Union, as you may already know, they sought to abolish the nuclear family unit as the basic economic unit of society, based on Engels's Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State, which is a banger of a book and talks all about how like family, like the current family structure that we have is not innate or natural, and actually nothing is innate or natural. But this is the first form of the family that was created out of economic necessity. So like basically the nuclear family as we have it now, or as it was in like the 1800s when Engels was writing it, was basically that the man goes to the job factory so he can earn money to support his wife, who is doing domestic labor at home and raising kids and stuff. And then when they die, the man can pass on his private property to his children, of whose paternity he is certain. Because before the monogamous nuclear family unit, people weren't really 100% certain of anyone's paternity, really, because it didn't matter. You didn't have private inheritance, so you didn't need that. So Engels basically said that we need to abolish the nuclear family unit. And if we want to liberate women, we need to socialize childcare. We need to socialize pretty much all of women's domestic labor and ensure that women are no longer financially reliant on men to like do anything and are able to be involved in public life. That was basically the Soviet Union's like basis for the answering the woman question. And one of the first things they did as a good nanny state was to attempt to socialize childcare and build like a huge network of kindergartens and nurseries. That I even found like a New York Times article, because I'm doing a lot of research about this for my next video, which is going to be about women's liberation in the Soviet Union. There was a New York Times article from like 1974 that was like, the Soviet network of kindergartens and nurseries is so much better than most of the West, including the US, and it only costs like a tenth of your salary to pay into this. And I think by the 80s, it was about, it was like no more than like 5% of one's salary to pay for childcare. And the plan was to eventually make it all completely subsidized by the government instead of just like 80% subsidized by the government. Because like one of the main things that the Soviets sought to do was to make it so that women had free time, so they weren't spending all of their waking days just caring for their kids and cleaning the house and cooking and all of that.
So you've kind of given us actually a very excellent kind of summary of what the baseline of the Soviet answer to the quote-unquote woman question was. Let's use the examples of your cartoons. How was the Soviet family presented in them? Like, say, for example, the one with the kid who runs away with his cat friend, and if that's a good one to use.
So I think something really interesting is that in aiming to abolish the family, the Soviet Union somehow ended up with better presentation of family and better portrayals of family values than like most Western media. Because I feel like in so much Western media, there's like a stupid dolt husband and a bitchy wife, and then they're annoying kids. But in Soviet media, like in Простоквашино, which is the one with the kid that runs away, the husband and wife don't have an antagonistic relationship. They do get into some conflicts, but they're solved very fast. Like in the beginning, when the kid gets a cat, they're talking about whether they want to keep the cat. And the dad is like, well, cats are fine. I like cats. And the mom's like, well, if we keep cats, then your wife will disappear. And he's like, well, I just met this cat and you're my wife. So I guess we'll kick out the cat. And the kid ends up running away because he's like, well, I don't want that. I want to exert my individuality and autonomy by having this cat. And he does that. And like the Soviet Union was also like super duper safe. So theoretically, a child could probably actually run off to the village and be totally fine. Oh, and what's really interesting is that there is a scene where the mom and the dad wash dishes together. They like wash and dry dishes together, which I think probably has, I don't know, I've never seen something like that in a Western cartoon. And this one was made, I think, in like the 70s or 80s. Let me check, actually.
Yeah, it's 2025. I don't think I've ever seen my dad wash dishes, so it still holds up pretty well.
Not even in Bluey.
Wow, it's 1978. It's a 1978 cartoon. And in 1978, the man and the woman, husband and wife, doing dishes on screen together. And in the Soviet Union, actually, because of all of these things that they did for women's liberation, it did, in fact, reduce the time that women spent on domestic labor and increase the time that men spent on domestic labor. So it went from being like men were doing like 2/5 as much domestic labor as women before, and then it went up to 4/5 by the 70s, I think.
And also, even that is that metric isn't able to paint the entire picture because, again, in the 70s, we're still in that. I mean, now it's like a full generation, but basically we're still that first generation after the war. And so a lot of domestic labor, a lot of the labor that happens in the home that really can't be divided. I mean, to a certain degree, we're getting better, or there's different options or opportunities, is like with newborn and like very young children. And so even to say that it was like 4/5 compared to what women were doing, it's sort of like there's going to be labor that is like just very hard to divide evenly. You know what I mean? And that was during a time where there was a whole lot of that labor, as it was like a project to like rebuild a population, you know?
Like compared to like Western portrayals of women and the family in the 70s, it's like, wow, so incredibly progressive. I think so many people don't realize how progressive the Soviet Union was because there's so many things that they did that we just now take for granted, or we can't even imagine as like a thing that a country could do for you. Like being a nanny state, quote unquote.
Right.
But by that, I mean just having government subsidized childcare. So you could have like a young baby and just put them into the daycare for the day while you go to work. Actually, it was pretty encouraged for Soviet people to have kids young, like even in college, because colleges and workplaces, a lot of them had like kindergartens and nurseries that you could just leave your kid at. So they would be effectively raised by the state, but it was still, you know, people and not like actually the state, obviously.
And now, a word from our sponsor. This summer, witness the return of the fifth head of Marxism, the comrade, the bear, Winnie the Pooh. And this time, he means business.
Хорошо живет на свете Винни-Пух, оттого поет он эти песни вслух. И неважно, чем он занят, если он худеть не станет, а ведь он...
ProlesPod presents the Winnie the Pooh Eras, a podcast series like no other. And now, back to the show.
What made me want to ask the question about media and its role in the Soviet family is like, okay, so I grew up, I've said before on different episodes, I grew up Maronite Catholic, and I went to a Maronite Catholic church, and I went to a Maronite Catholic daycare. And honestly, as I got a little bit older, like my parents were like very ambivalent as to whether or not they even sort of like believed really these things. And eventually I asked my mom, I was like, then why did you insist that I go to church if you didn't like care if I believed those things or not, and if you didn't really believe those things? And she was like, well, my church, by the way, was like very chill and none of the like weird Catholic guilt stories that are unfortunately all too common. But my mom was like, well, I just think it's really important for kids to like hear good messages from adults who aren't their parents. And so I guess really what I was sort of thinking about as I was watching this is like, it's so helpful to know that even the media, even the cartoons that your child is going to watch are going to have messages that are very much like in alignment with what you want. And I feel like in the West, like you can, I mean, yeah, I guess you can watch like Veggie Tales, right? Like you could watch like actual like Christian media or something like that. And again, like you said, like you can watch capitalist media that has kids wanting to aspire to the same kinds of like individual glory or whatever that is prized under capitalism. And just a very different world where the messages that a child would watch at home by themselves or with their friends or whatever are going to be delivering the same kind of messages that you would hope that they would be getting in the home. But unlike in Western media, you don't have to rely on, unlike a capitalist mode of production and the societies that arise from it, you don't have to rely on the nuclear family to be the administrator of like every good social value because they're reflected anywhere that a child would be.
One thing, we're talking about, the presentation of the family, particularly like, men participating in domestic work. Lady Izdihar has done, I think, excellent work in showing this in a variety of ways, whether through, imagery, posters, comparing media in the West to what's happening in the Soviet Union and the presentation of women. But there's one particular, I think, video that she did on this, and she was, showing on in the video a picture of a group of Soviet men who were in the 1950s looking at like, newspapers as they were in the Soviet Union at the time. They'd be like, kind of plastered onto walls so that people could walk by and stand right next to them and talk about them, etc. And these group of men, virtually every single one of them had a stroller with them with a baby in it, right? And so we're thinking about like the 1950s, and we just have a group of men who are being depicted as being the sole kind of caregivers in the moment, and they're doing this like with the bros, you know what I mean? Like the boys are out with their babies. It was like such a radical thing, but it's not really remembered, I guess, in the West, or even noted in the West, rather, that society could be like that.
Yeah, no, that's like, that would be unheard of in the West, though. Like, can you imagine like a group of like 50s guys hanging out with their babies all together? Like, no.
Or like, and even today, like dads babysit their children. Like it is part of like common parlance to say
Yeah,
that.
I was literally going to say that there was a movie, so I think like when this came out, but 2003 Daddy Daycare, right? There's like, it's like literally like a comedy genre of like men taking care of their kids, right?
I was going to bring this up. Like, oh my God, wouldn't it be so funny if men took care of children?
It's like 3 men and a baby, like it's wild, right?
Yeah. That is the whole conceit of a bunch of Hollywood movies. Childcare? Men? Wow! Comedy shall ensue.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be hilarious because men, they just don't have that maternal instinct that women do.
They wouldn't possibly know how to care for like their own children or like care for anything at all.
Yeah, all they want to do is just play football and drink beer with the bros.
And crush beer cans on their forehead. I'm married to Martin, so I have no idea what this ilk of man does, because the people's husband would never, and he is very clean and does all the dishes, to be honest.
I do down the chips.
Oh yeah, that's true. So like when he gets to the bottom of the bag of chips, he like straightens out the bag and then like tilts it into his mouth. And like every time he does that, I'm like, I have married.
They actually made that illegal in the Soviet Union.
It was actually in the family code of 26. They were like, absolutely fucking not.
Yeah, if you're eating chips, you better not.
This makes me have another question, because as we're thinking about, the family codes of the early Soviet Union, of which there were many, they evolved, they dealt with a lot of things. But the Soviet Union was confronted with the fact that like Tsarist Russia didn't really, I don't want to be too reductive about this, but really didn't have a conceptualization of what childhood was, unless you were very, very, very wealthy. And then there were like maybe certain milestones, or maybe like very, very, very into the church. And again, there were like certain milestones that you did within your life. But in terms of like, not on the day of your baptism or something, just like what that state of life is and what it's about and what your responsibility would be to somebody who was in that state of life, the Soviets worked really, really hard to conceive of like what that might mean. And so we were just talking about the family, sort of the family constellation in general, but I'm wondering also about the media and what it teaches us about Soviet conceptualization of childhood and of children. Because it seems to me like, compared to the West, again, children are given freedom beyond children. And this is like you were saying, Tony, that it's not really like a realism in this kind of media. So there's like aliens and animals and all these different other kinds of like creatures and beings, but basically like to each according to his ability, right? Like we see that like everyone has autonomy, everyone can contribute. Even at the end, the mom that we were talking about before who didn't want the cat, she was like, oh, actually like the cat can contribute to the family. And so like the cat can stay, yay. And they have this sort of like reconciliation, but it just seems like everyone has autonomy and everyone can contribute and everyone has a certain kind of like freedom or individuality, ironically, or agency in this sort of conceptualization of childhood.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like this is kind of a tangent, but I feel like a lot of people seem to think that collectivism and individualism are like two completely different things and you can't have both. But the Soviet Union had both. It had people working towards a collective goal, but also trying to like striving to be their best individual self and exerting their individual autonomy. So it was both collectivist and individualist.
And they really highlighted like when the like crocodile creature joins the pioneers, right? Like joins it's a crocodile creature, right? Like joins like this like youth organization and they're like, yeah, you don't look like us when you march because, well, you don't have the same kind of body, but like you can march with us. Like, come on, let's go, right? It's like it's understood that it's like you can participate in the way that you're able.
I think that's so cute and just so representative of the fact that, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is a little bit blue of me, but I feel like we all have like natural gifts that we're born with and existing is just a way to discover them.
Sure.
And I think the Soviet Union does a really great job at portraying that. Like in Тайна третьей планеты, Mystery of the Third Planet, like Alisa Селезнёва, one of the main characters, is literally a 9-year-old girl. But she's like a completely autonomous being throughout the entire thing. But also at the same time, since her dad is there, he is quite literally parenting her. And there's also never like this whole like, oh, he's a dad babysitting his child type of thing. It's just a girl hanging out with her dad and the captain of the ship. Actually, in one scene, they like have to fight against some robots that ambush them, and Alisa takes on like 2 robots at once, while her dad and his friend are fighting one robot. And I'm like, damn, a 9-year-old girl really is the strongest being in the universe.
I was gonna say, I'm connecting with like what you're saying to, of course, Soviet Union is no longer around, but the concepts it pioneered in terms of like, say, children's rights, let's call it, is best expressed today perhaps in Cuba, who recently had their family code rewritten and, you know, voted on by the public for a new set of laws going forward in that regard. And they've been praised by the UN in this regard by, you know, allowing children to have that autonomy, by clarifying that, you know, parents don't have an authority over children. They have responsibilities towards their children, but they aren't like they're the god to the child.
Yeah, you don't own your kids.
Exactly.
You just
children
have
are property.
You have to take care of them. You had them. Now deal with it. You are responsible for them. Yeah. I love Cuba's family code so much. It just gives me so much hope. It's so beautiful. And the fact that it was created via democratic participation is amazing. And also it gives like more rights to like trans people and disabled people and the elderly, like, and children, of course. Oh, I just love it. Chef's kiss. Cuba doing amazing things. Yeah, I think that actually in my video, I did make that point when talking about Простоквашино and talking about how the kid that leaves for the village is just like, no, I'm my own boy, bye. And how, like, as socialists, we want to respect children's autonomy because we recognize that they are separate beings from us. Like, the conception of children in the West often tends to be a little bit, I don't want to say narcissistic, but like so many people view their children as either property or as an extension of themselves that they can, you know, like influence towards a direction that the parent wants without really taking into account what the child wants and what the child is good at. And that's terrible. Yeah, like I love how in Простоквашино at one point the kid, when he's in the village already, the mailman stops by and is like, hey, whose kid are you? And he's like, I'm my own kid. And he's like, no, but like kids have to be someone's. And he's like, no, they don't. And the cat and the dog are both like, I'm my own cat. I'm my own dog. Why can't he be his own kid? And it's so cute and funny.
And it still exists like in our world, right? Because I guess we sort of see that in like Peter Pan or something like that, but they literally live in like a magical parallel universe where that would be possible versus in the Soviet model, which is like he just did that in his own, in like this world that we live in, except it's animated.
Yeah. Yeah, and Peter Pan is also like it's weird because they're young forever, so right? Like they never want to grow up or something.
Things
it's
going on
giving
in Peter
vampire.
Pan.
It's not.
Like child autonomy is so foreign to the Western imaginary that you have things coming from like Japan, for example, old enough that is so exotic. Oh, look, like a toddler running an errand because cities are walkable and safe. So foreign, so wow. We could never do that here.
Yeah, I mean, with our car-dependent infrastructure.
Let's just kids drive or get or self-driving cars. That will solve everything.
I mean, it's not just the infrastructure, right? It's also, again, about a different relationship to the state, and like, not to prize the Japanese model. I'm sorry, I do not. But blessings to all of our Japanese listeners. Thank you so much for being here. I really do mean that. But there is an understanding, not just in Japan, but in certainly East Asian culture more broadly, and a lot of cultures throughout the world, that it's like any child that you see out there doing something, like, you can say something to them. You can intervene on behalf of their safety. You can ask them if they need help. They can ask you if they need help. And there's, again, just a different conceptualization that doesn't require what we have so often in many Western countries, which is that sort of like helicopter parent. And like, it can be funny and it can be like a joke, but also like, if you live in a culture, I say this as somebody who doesn't have children, but if you live in a culture where the expectation is that no fucking buddy, not the state, not the school, not a person on the street, not any other fucking person other than your direct relative who lives in your home with you, even because again, there's also like, don't, grandma, don't talk to my daughter that way or this or that. Again, I think that there's like very legitimate reasons for this. I totally understand people wanting to raise their kids in accordance with the world that they want to see. But I also think it like very clearly arises from a culture where like you are on your fucking own. And so in a world where every single person who does not live under your roof is your adversary, like, of course you wouldn't let your 3 or 4 or 5-year-old walk to the corner store. But when you live in a different cultural context where it's like the children, I believe the children are the future, that all of the children are a part of this thing that I'm also a part of. And like, I would say something if I thought any child was doing something dangerous, or if they were going to get hurt, or if something untoward was happening, or if someone was looking at them in a certain way or something like that. When you live in a different context, you don't have to have the same kind of like helicopter vigilance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the relationship between children and like other people that are not part of their family is a lot less antagonistic and a lot less threatening. Like, I think so often in the West, children are taught about like stranger danger, or like there's the whole moral panic about like the gay people are grooming our children, or like trans
or like
people.
Satanic rituals, right? They just keep being recycled like over and over and over and over
satanic
again.
panic just over and over again in different iterations. And right now we're
going through the transphobic one.
Well, what's ironic, right, is that like the neoliberal anti-immigrant see something, say something is like a hateful perversion of, again, what can exist in an interdependent culture where it's like, no, I would like, if I saw a kid doing something that I thought that they might get hurt or hurt somebody else, like I would say something, and not in like a carceral way, but in a way of like, we're all part of the same community. And it's okay for me to like intervene or to want to participate or to de-escalate a situation because like I too am a part of this community.
Yeah, exactly. Like in Chiburashka, like when Crocodile Gena the crocodile, literally saves this kid from falling into a manhole or falling out of a window because these kids literally have nothing better to do because there's no playground. I feel like that's, in the West, that's like almost unheard of.
I mean, or even the postman, he's not saying it again in a carceral or punitive way, saying like, but whose are you? Like the postman is also like, well, I'm doing my job. And a part of my job is like keeping an eye on what else is going on. I mean, it's one of those interesting seeming, like you said, seeming contradictions similar to the like collectivism versus individualism, that there's this sort of like dichotomy of like when everybody is like willing to participate, then like nobody has to have this sort of like hypervigilant ownership because like we are willing mutually to take care of one another.
Yeah, and everyone can contribute individually in whatever way they possibly can, from each according to their ability
toward a collective vision. Exactly. including children, right? Which I guess kind of comes back to the question of just like, they're able to make contributions, they're able to have their own ideas, they're able to have their own autonomy without either doing the two sides of the coin that we often see under capitalist media, which is that either children don't know what they're doing and they just say the dumbest fucking shit, and that young people's ideas are idiotic and they come from nowhere, or children are some kind of like magical angel beings who have some kind of wisdom that needs to be like cherished and protected at all costs, but again comes down to like ownership and vigilance, right? And this is something that sort of breaks out of that and allows children to be people who are having an age-appropriate experience. Again, they want to build a playground and not like, I don't know, a nightclub or something that would not be appropriate for the age of the people who are involved.
Yeah, exactly. And like in Prostokvashino, what I find really funny is that in order to avoid having the kid do child labor, while they're like trying to figure out how to make money, they literally the story is just like, oh, they go and find buried treasure. Bam. Problem solved. Because child labor is bad.
And it's one of the things that comes up a lot in the media and a lot of your videos is the relationship with money and how it seems at least to be maybe hopefully either diminishing or even like phased out, which kind of makes me want to ask a question about the Soviet conceptualization of the future and how media, especially children's media, which I think is really smart because it's like the children are the ones that are going to build this future, right? Once they're a little bit older. And so like how media helps the Soviet Union popularize their ideas or their sort of world building.
Yeah. So like with Тайна Третьей планеты, Mystery of the Third Planet, yeah, they have someone left a comment about this. So I know what the actual like economic system is there. So the Earth is communist. They are a classless, stateless, moneyless society there, but they still have money to use on other planets that have not achieved full communism yet. And that's like super interesting and super cool because I mean, I feel like in the West, so many of us like don't have an imagination of what the future could be by design, right? Because we're all constantly kept in this super hyper vigilant, like panicked state.
Or we just have a dystopic future.
Exactly.
We do have some kind of vision of the future, but it is always like the most dystopic.
Yeah.
possible.
It's like literally 1984. Like, don't even try to make things better because you're just going to end up with a dystopia. It's better to just deal with this bad system because anything you try to create will be so much worse. Whereas in the Soviet Union, its portrayals of the future are typically very positive and very optimistic and very much like this is what could happen if we achieved full communism, if we had a classless, stateless, moneyless society. Like children could have full autonomy. You could go on space adventures.
I don't want to be maybe too reductive. I hope that this isn't sort of too rich because I do understand that we're looking at children's media specifically. But I also thought that like the approach and the purpose of space exploration in this Soviet future, right? Because the reality is that for the United States, space exploration is literally just to like fund the military and fund weapons, as well as potentially now, right, with colonizing Mars, right? It's an imperial project and it's a military project and it always has been. But the idea that it seems, again, I know that this is for children, but like it's presenting a space exploration that is like about cultural enrichment, building relationship, environmental and scientific curiosities. And it's a very different conceptualization of like what these things could be or could be for. I mean, Martin and I have a friend who used to work for NASA, and he was actually also born in the Soviet Union and now has very different politics than you do. But one of the things that we were talking about as to his sort of like far right turn was that he was like, I am so interested in space. And like from probably for some of the same reasons, like he was like from growing up from when I was a little kid, because we're all kind of within the realm of the same age, you know, that like I would watch these cartoons and this was the most interesting thing. And this is like why I went into what I went into. This is why I worked for NASA. And he's like, just knowing what I know now, I know that like without empire and without the military, all of the space exploration like would sort of stop. And it's just like very sad, you know, that he's like had this experience because I was like, well, I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think that in a democratic society, I think there's a lot of people that maybe not today, we have some other pretty pressing concerns, but I think that like space and like deep sea exploration and environmental exploration is like very interesting to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would, but you know, like he had just had the experiences that he had and he was like, oh no, I know that this is where the money comes from. And so now I'm invested in the system because he didn't have the revolutionary optimism or the socialist realism required to see that as a possibility.
Yeah. Wow, that's so wild.
So perhaps the only like sole, maybe there's probably others, but the major example of this existing in Western media, of this positive perspective of the future,
I know what you're gonna say.
yes, of space exploration, of living in a society that's post-scarcity, where money doesn't exist, is Star Trek.
Which my dad loves, by the way. My Soviet dad, of course he does.
Yeah, Star Trek's I love that show. For the most part, the stories aren't reactionary. Every now and then, because the writers change, directors change, blah blah blah. It's not always consistent, but for the most part, the Star Trek is that gold standard of what we could be living in, that the West is able to produce through their media.
Oh yeah, what I was going to say, that like the newer Star Trek is because again the writers are more of our generation, are much more connected to that part of it. But even then, like there was this episode in the animated one in the Lower Decks where they basically, like, Starfleet goes to a planet that's going through the moneyless to becoming very, very much communist, basically. And there are like reactionaries that are portrayed literally as terrorists, because they are the ruling class that doesn't want to give up being the ruling class, and they are literally like classified as terrorists by Starfleet. And even then, the thing, capitalist realism rears its ugly head, because the only way that this can happen in the Star Trek universe is because there's the replicator, and that makes everything post-scarcity. It is not human technology as organization, but like actual technology of having something that can rearrange matter. And that is the sad thing, even like in something like Star Trek, that like even as optimistic as your media can get, you're always bounded by something that is not, how about we reorganize society? Things that we can actually do right now. No, we have to wait until we have something that can literally rearrange atoms.
Yeah, we just need to wait until the technology appears at some point, maybe. Yeah.
That again, we don't work to, or we don't plan for. It's just like we hope that it arises. Again, cult of spontaneity.
Yeah, it just like magically happens through magic, because we just waited long enough and we believed.
And I think specifically, so I think we're gonna have to do a Star Trek episode in the future, but I think specifically within the Star Trek universe, or like their canon or whatever, it's them meeting the Vulcans essentially, which kind of kickstarts their trajectory into post-scarcity. So yeah, it's kind of this external force coming in and helping them. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and after so much Western media bashing, I would love to know your opinion on what actual Western media that we have that you would recommend, or at least that you see some interesting ideas being portrayed within children's media and in general, of course. Because I was Bluey bashing before, but there's an actual episode where like Bandit, the dad that actually does housework, and there's a whole episode of that. Dads do housework. And so like Bluey is now the gold standard, but even within that, like it's very much a nuclear family, and it's very much Disney owned, and which makes censorship a whole other ballgame when they don't want things portrayed that the creators want portrayed, et cetera, et cetera. And also, with the dismantling of the U.S. government as it's happening right now, like one of the few bastions of actual care that there was PBS, and even their project is flawed when you compare it to the to socialist cartoons, where like you have all this complexity in such an approachable way and not in a top-down way, which is sadly what happens like with even the most well-meaning things like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers. So yeah. What are some Western media things, children or otherwise, that you like or see potential in?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is SpongeBob, because they have that whole episode where they go on strike against Mr. Krabs. I mean, that's just a great show in general. There's a lot of really funny episodes. And I feel like with that, a lot of the conflict really is between like the workers versus the boss, right? Like the workers versus Mr. Krabs, who is the capitalist. And yeah, I love SpongeBob. What else? I'm like trying to think of every movie I've watched. Another thing that comes to mind, this is not Western because this is Japanese, but Kiki's Delivery Service and Spirited Away are both great and great at portraying childhood and great at portraying children as independent, autonomous beings who are able to make their own decisions and work with a goal in mind.
Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Avatar: The Last Airbender, thank you. Yes, Avatar: The Last Airbender is amazing. The way that the Fire Nation is literally just the American Empire. Wow, that's great. That's a great show.
Although Korra drops the ball in that first
Oh
season.
my god, Korra is...
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, not perfect, but yeah.
I wish Korra was better. I really do, because I feel like it had so much potential, but then it's like, oh, the guy that wants people to be equal is bad. The communist is evil.
Something that has yet to come up, even though we've talked about the state and the state's role in your life, it is just a broader conversation about a social contract and Soviets having a different sort of social contract. And I think that, like, if you grow up in, we've talked about this before, RevolutionaryTh0t off of the recording, that all media is propaganda. Like, all media is propagandizing something. But if you're observing the media from a culture with very different values than the one that you were raised in, it's very easy, right, to like point at that and be like, aha, propaganda, even though, right, like every piece of Western media, again, whether it's explicitly like simping for the state and the fucking US military, or if it's subtler things like, all I'm trying to get is a man to love me so that I can like start my own nuclear family, or all I want is a promotion because I'm ambitious, or whatever the fuck it is, all of this is propagandizing capitalist values to people. And with that, the sort of subtle undercurrent, the thing that underpins that is one's social contract and the relationship to the state. And I talked about this a lot during the Stalin eras because, again, we're two PDA baddies. If you all don't know, that means that we have like demand avoidance and we don't like to be told what to do. And so like you might think that that would mean that we would not want to be Marxist-Leninists, right? That we would have a really hard time with this kind of like conceptualization of relationship to the state or a different kind of social contract. But I'm just like wondering what your own experience is with this, what you think that the media teaches us about this sort of like different kind of relationship to the state. Again, we have like run-in with the police. We have the monarchy even kind of shows up for a minute there. We have like the space a company that is presumably like state owned and therefore like an extension of the state. Like, how do we feel about that? How do we relate to the state? And what does Soviet media teach us about having a different kind of social contract or having a different kind of relationship to the state?
In a lot of Western media, the state is either like not portrayed at all really, or it's like the military, you're contracting for the military, someone's working for the military, or it's a war movie, so like the military is involved. Usually if the state is involved, it's like in the background or it's the military.
Or it's like the government, capital T, capital G, and also often sometimes the government is like the good guys who are just being like dicked around by like the oligarchs or even like somehow antagonistic to the military, but also sometimes like propped up by the military rather than this just being like giant amorphous blob that is like exerting power on working people, period.
Yeah, like West Wing. Literally my entire government class in high school was just us watching West Wing. So US education system at work.
I did not have a government class in high school, so there you go.
US education system of work. Yeah, I think in Soviet media, a lot of the time when the state is presented, or like someone's relationship to the state is presented, it's never really antagonistic. It's not someone being like, oh, the government sucks and we have to overthrow it. I mean, I feel like that probably wouldn't make it past the censors anyway, which is fine. I feel like censorship is fine. I am not a free speech absolutist. But this actually reminds me of another Soviet movie called Mimino, which is about this Georgian pilot. Yeah, this Georgian pilot that wants to, like, he is sick of small town life and wants to work for a big airline. And as he's trying to get a new job, which after he quits the way that he quits his job is also really funny because he like gets his boss's car towed, or like gets it towed because he's like, I don't know why they don't like you. I had your license for the car. It's so funny. Because he was using his boss's license. But anyway, he quits his job and he tries to work for one of the big airlines because he meets his old like schoolmate's colleague, who he's like, oh my God, she's so hot. I want to work for a big airline now. So the entire movie is basically him trying to like achieve that goal. And on the way, he makes friends with this Armenian guy. And so at some point in the movie, while he and his Armenian friend, they get kicked out of a hotel. So they're trying to sell a tire so they can make some money. So they're not just like, oh, fuck, we have no money and like nowhere to stay. And they go into this random apartment complex because they see that one of the cars doesn't have a tire. So they're like, oh, we'll just sell it to this guy. They literally ask someone outside, like, oh, hey, whose apartment? Like, who does this car belong to? And they just tell them the apartment number because, like, I mean, it's the Soviet Union. Like, no, they're not going to come and beat you up, except he does actually come and beat the guy up. So he beats the guy up. He goes to jail. He ends up like missing the deadline to transfer jobs because he's now too old or something. Like he turns 35 while in jail. But in the end, it ends up working out because it turns out that like the young and experienced lawyer that they got him, she's actually super duper competent and figures out that the reason he beat this guy up is because this guy impregnated Valiko's, the Georgian pilot's sister, and then left her. And they're like, whoa, that's really super fucked up. We can't have that. So Valiko ends up getting out of jail. The lawyer, does her job beautifully. And that's his experience with the system. That is the government. Like the Soviet government is weirdly enough kind of a character in this movie. And it shows that the Soviet system works towards justice. It moves towards justice and it works for the people. So like, even though he did this thing that a lot of us would probably consider terrible, he beat a guy up, he committed aggravated assault or whatever, he ends up getting off scot-free because he had a legitimate reason to do it because that guy messed with his sister and was kind of a dick to her. And then he does also end up being able to transfer to a big airline because they're able to make an exception for him. They're like, oh, okay, whoops. And it all works out in the end. But then in the end of the movie, he's like, spoiler, this movie is like decades old though. He's like, you know what? Actually, being a big airline pilot sucks. I want to go back to Georgia. And it's very much like, it turns out the thing that I wanted was what I had all along.
Aww.
And he took a long journey to get there. But it's so interesting how the Soviet Union and like his relationship to the state is actually a big part of that movie.
Right.
Yeah, like even when he goes because he has to retrain to be the sort of like jet pilot for the bigger airline. And and they confuse him, or rather the guy in charge confuses him for the son of one of his war buddies. And then when they find out, he basically excuses himself only to find out that they actually let him in the program regardless. So like even that state, even that part of the state, like, oh, it is, like you have to know someone and like a certain low level corruption that happens anywhere. Even that is dismissed in a way that, this is a person who, like has been through a lot and wants to do something that is in our power to make it happen. Why not? And so like it is a very, as you say, like it is a portrayal of the state that is quite benevolent.
Yeah, very much benevolent and very much like not something to fight against, but something that works with you on your behalf because it's a people's state.
Yeah, not even just benevolent so much as like materialist, right? Like that the idea that the justice system would bend toward justice would involve a material analysis on a case-by-case basis, right? And so they like weigh it out and they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, like maybe you do deserve to get beat up for impregnating this girl and then leaving her. I don't know.
So we have talked a lot about the way that the Soviet Union conceives of itself in its own media, which is the purpose of this episode, so not surprising. But I'm curious, because I've seen some of your other videos, on the way that Western media portrays like Russia specifically, but maybe the Soviet Union more broadly, and the comparison and the contrast of the historical accuracy.
Okay. Yeah. The way that Western media portrays Russia is such a mess. I often avoid any Western movies that have Russians in them. But there was like one time I was hanging out with my friends and they were like, let's watch Anastasia. And I was like, okay. And the entire time I was literally like, this makes no sense. This makes no sense. This didn't happen. So of course I had to make a video about it many years later, of course. But yeah, Anastasia is such a good case study of how badly Western media portrays Russians. And it's actually one of probably like the kindest portrayals of Russia in Western media, which is yikes. But basically, if for those that don't know the plot of Anastasia, it starts off with a Romanov ball in 1916, which never happened. They stopped having balls at that time because it was World War I. And Rasputin shows up and curses the entire family, who then gets overthrown by the Bolsheviks the next year, because we all know that the October Revolution was caused by a curse and not by material conditions.
Well, obviously, because it couldn't be like organized labor, it has to be like one bad guy doing a curse.
Yeah, it was just like some random bad guy making some random people do this random thing that ended up in the government being overthrown randomly. Who could have seen this coming? No one, apparently. Like, that's like totally the way that it's portrayed. And basically the entire Romanov family is killed except Anastasia and her grandma. But Anastasia can't like get onto the train with her grandma, who ends up leaving. And then like falls down, hits her head, gets memory loss. She's got a traumatic brain injury now, very tragic. Ends up living in an orphanage as a girl named Anya. And then in the like after the prologue, this is basically the prologue. After the prologue, she leaves this orphanage, randomly goes to St. Petersburg without a plan. Like, she, again, cult of spontaneity. She literally like comes to this crossroads and is like, should I go to this fishing village that this old crazy woman named Comrade Fleminkoff, oh, she's a comrade, disgusting, right? Like, that this woman told me to go to. Or should I just randomly go to St. Petersburg because my heart wants to go to St. Petersburg and I don't know why, but please give me a sign. And then a cute little dog shows up and is like, hey, go to St. Petersburg. And then she names the dog Puka, which I talk about this in my video, but Puk means fart in Russian.
To be fair, I would go anywhere that a Russian dog
encouraged
me to go, to be honest. Like, just, yeah. I would be very susceptible to that. Okay, tell me more about Fart Dog.
Yeah, I'm susceptible to brainwashing by dogs and cats, but there's no cats in there. But anyway, yeah, so she names the dog Fart, or Farta, which, okay, whatever, weird. She goes to St. Petersburg. She tries to leave to go to Paris, but can't get an exit visa because, like, duh, you kind of need those, which I would imagine that by this point she would know, but okay. She meets up with these two con artists who are like, yeah, we'll get you to Paris, not knowing that they're actually trying to like profit off of her because they think she's a really convincing Anastasia lookalike. And because Anastasia's grandma has offered a like monetary reward for anyone that finds Anastasia. So they like antics ensue. They teach her how to be Anastasia and they meet her grandma and it gets a little messy because the grandma's like, Dmitri, I know you're a con man. He gets slapped. It's hilarious. But in the end, like Anastasia and her grandma are reunited and it's so cute and they sing a song together. And in the end, Anastasia decides that the life of palaces and balls aren't really for her and elopes with Dmitri the con man. And her grandma, the like Grand Duchess, Maria Fyodorovna, is like weirdly chill about it and is like, oh my God, I love love. Even though I really don't think that this monarch who was raised believing that she would be in an arranged marriage and so would her children and her children's children, like, I don't think she'd be down for that, but whatever. And it's just such a messy portrayal of Russia. Like, literally, there's that song, there's a rumor in St. Petersburg, it starts off talking all about how ever since the revolution, our lives are so gloomy and dreary and everything is so hard. And like, things were absolutely hard during the revolution and immediately after, but it's not like things were great and easy in the Russian Empire, which this is heavily implying that like things were fine.
Right. That is the point, that they wanted the revolution. Mm-hmm. That is why the revolution happened, is because like Tsarist Russia was like not lit.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't even like mention the fact that there was a February Revolution that ousted the Tsar, and then the October Revolution that put into place the Bolshevik government. Like, the Soviet government kind of existed after the February Revolution too, because they had like a dual government thing going on with the Kerensky government. Yeah, they like don't mention the fact that there were two revolutions, and the revolution happens during a ball where the entire Romanov family is just in a palace, but it's the summer palace.
Well, and again, because like a revolution takes like 10 minutes, right? It's like a spontaneous uprising that's a result, obviously, of a curse, and it can just happen over the course of like one dinner and dance.
Exactly.
Rev thought, if you want to kind of, before we move on, to just summarize basically what is the capitalist take on Russia and Russian media, and like you said, the sort of like causeless reason why like things might have been hard at a certain time, and you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of picking up on like no reason, revolution, it was awkward, and then things were really bad and like nobody knows why, and And how at the end of the day, like, it's just awesome being wealthy.
Yeah, money is great. Being royalty is great. You should never strive for communism because you should just get rich. I feel like those are like some of the lessons Anastasia teaches us. But also in terms of like Western media in general and their portrayals of Russians, there's so many like Russian quote unquote characters out there. Like Black Widow is one that comes to mind, where like their Russianness is literally just part of their tragic backstory. And it's like they had like really hard upbringing in childhood in Russia, and now they're here.
Well, I mean, even in Anastasia, right? The idea that like she would marry a con man is not really a big deal because like aren't all Russians con men? Really?
Right? Yeah. And plus he's reformed because he didn't even want to take the grandma's money anyway. But yeah, like God, Anastasia's just such a mess. Yeah, it really like so many of the Russian characters, especially the ones that have Russian accents, like Comrade Flemenkov, are presented as like, oh, these like gruff jerks that just are evil and communist.
Oh, right. I haven't seen Anastasia in a minute, right? Like the wealthy people don't even, they're Russian too, but they like talk differently.
Yeah, like it's really kind of funny and a little on the nose that the few characters that do have Russian accents are kind of assholes, like Comrade Flemenkov at the orphanage at the beginning. She's got a super strong Russian accent, which I guess makes her bad, and you call her comrade, which makes her extra bad because communism clutches pearls. Whereas, yeah, like all the rich people are presented as super nice and chill, super great, totally what you should be aspiring to. And Dmitri is weird. I mean, the entire character of Dmitri I just don't like because his entire shtick is that he's a con man and he literally like acts like a pickup artist. He nags Anya and is like, "Oh my god, so you said your name's Enya? Oh, you want to go to France? Well, I've got these tickets," and like waves them in front of her face, like, like this is what you're telling children is attractive. So weird.
This is what we're telling children that like Russian men do, right? Like it's not even just that this is attractive, but this is just how it be in Russia. They're all just like this for, again, predestined reasons.
Yeah, and you know, the only job you can get in Russia that's going to make you any money is a con man because no one's getting paid anything because we're all getting paid the same and it's nothing because of communism is also kind of the vibe I get from it. Even though like people obviously had different salaries depending on what job they were doing, but you know, that's never going to be said or shown in Western media.
Right. Okay, so we have the Soviet conceptualization of itself and the way that this is presented in media, especially for young people. We have looked a little bit about how the West is kind of tackling the same message, this sort of counter propaganda. But I wonder if in closing, as we sort of wind down before we get to the secret speech, which everyone should go listen to by going to patreon.com/ProlesPod and signing up. More broadly, I wonder also, as someone with some experience in tech kind of recently, if we can look at tech's intersection with childhood in general. And as you were saying before, the sort of role that whatever the mode of production is, the role that the mode of production plays in sort of like shaping our lives, in shaping our desires, and I guess in a way, like even sort of shaping our self-concept.
Tech and its impact on childhood is super interesting, especially as, I mean, I think we're all millennials here, right? Like, so we got to grow up in a time where technology wasn't really that much of a thing. Like, we had TV and like phones and like maybe like dial-up internet. And now, you know, you have literally all the information you could possibly want at your fingertips. So that's a whole thing. And it's really interesting seeing this like new generation of kids who just grow up using technology. Like technology is like part of their life from the moment they're born. Like their parents like leave them at home with iPads or just put on like, I don't know, Baby Einstein or VeggieTales or something and have them watch TV. I mean, all that really does, like, although I get why parents might want to have their kids engage with iPads or like technology or whatever, because everyone's super busy. We're all stressed out all the time, right? So it helps take the load off in a way.
Right. And again, incredibly alone and not able to afford childcare. And even the sort of like nuclear family, quote unquote, built in childcare. Like how many of us have, like my father still works, he's 70.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because like we're poor. So even what you're supposed to have built in is like a lot of families don't have, I mean, we don't have kids, but like a lot of families don't even have that option because elders can't retire.
Yeah, exactly. So like the people who would often take care of the kids, like the grandparents, yeah, like you said, they can't retire. They have to be at work. They can't be taking care of their grandchildren. So it makes a lot of sense that there's parents that do leave their kids with an iPad or with like just put a movie on, put a cartoon on or something. But at the same time, I think that just leads to further atomization and isolation because these kids are not really interacting with other kids as much. And I mean, I don't have kids myself, but my spouse is a teacher and teaches middle schoolers. So
same. I teach primary, but same.
Nice. Yeah. So just like like hearing about how these kids are nowadays is very interesting. It sounds quite different from how it was when I was a kid. Like I feel like when I was in middle school, it was like weird to be as online as I was. Like I was like on MySpace and Neopets and like Gaia all the time, and that was my jam. But that was weird. That was unusual to be so online and so like entrenched in internet culture. But now that's like the norm.
Well, it was, I mean, yes, it was unusual. And also, like, I remember it being a hobby in its own right. And, I had lived abroad for a very long time. And like during my time abroad, I have also intermittently, again, I'm a teacher. So like I have also taught like English as a second language. And I remember ESL books from like 10, 15 years ago. And when you would go over hobbies, like a hobby would be like, I like to surf the web. I like to go online. Versus like now you would never list that as a hobby because like you literally have to do it to be participating in society. And like certainly that just like, as you said, as you alluded to, happens younger and younger. And I also think, sorry if I inadvertently asked a leading question, but like the question about shaping our lives and our desires, I think children now, especially under the capitalist mode of production, and this is true globally, with maybe the exception of China, who has developed all of its own apps and all of its own alternatives. But like all of the other countries in the world that are heavily dependent on American and Americanized tech, children are born consumers.
Yeah, they're born propagandized into this like American way of thinking and into using American social media, American technology.
Like they're not even citizens. Like they are primarily consumers. And from a younger age, they are taught, we are teaching young people that like your self-concept is what you can buy. And everything that you can do in your life is all of the meaningful things in your life are going to happen as a result of the money that you make and the way that you use either your influence because you have made money in that kind of way, or like the money that you made. The only way that you can express yourself, the only way that you can desire anything is like mediated through that which you can buy or maybe buy and sell.
Yeah, you are a consumer first and foremost. And anything outside of that is just like an accessory.
Right. Is a result of what has been bought or sold. I guess we will bring this episode to a close. Is there anything that you want to end on?
Under socialism, a lot of our self-concept, or not our, because we don't live under socialism, but a lot of one's self-concept is shaped basically by how you contribute as an individual to the collective. Like, how are you helping to build socialism, and not about how am I making money necessarily, even though the way the contributing to building socialism is like a job someone does often that they do get compensated for and they get paid for and all that. But it's completely different from the way that we conceptualize ourselves in the West as workers, as like an individual worker that is just trying to get that bag, trying to make as much money as possible.
And when it's sort of like mediated by the buying and selling, again, this is reflected, the mirror image of it is the way that we are alienated from our labor. And it sort of seems like what you're saying is the Soviet conceptualization is like, you put in a good day's work, you do something that contributes to society, and you directly get to observe the impact that you've had on your community, on the project of socialism more broadly, and maybe on like the thing, like you said, your aptitude, maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're a great teacher, maybe you're a writer or something like that. And you get to enjoy like genuinely how good it feels to like do something well and to immediately observe how you can contribute, versus like the Western capitalist model is like you're so alienated from, let's say you have like a bullshit email job and you do your bullshit email job and you're so alienated from like what did it even do, and then like the shareholder value and the increase of the, and by the way, you don't get any of that profit, and all, like you're so alienated from your labor. Again, I think that like in capitalism we have two ideas. It's either like you're dealing with like the soulless, soul-sucking burnout that so many of us feel, and the only other thing that you can imagine is like I can't work at all. And I think that like through Soviet media and through these projections, I guess like what we're teaching children, right, is that like you can do something that is beneficial and you can do something that's helpful. You can observe the immediate impacts of that, and like that can like allow you to like feel really good. And I think that like to your point, that creates like such a very different self-concept of like, I am a part of a whole. I am an important part of a whole. And the things that I do and the things that I enjoy and the way that I contribute really matters. And it's so interesting, again, that dichotomy that like when I allow myself to contribute meaningfully to the collective, then I get more fully to experience myself as an individual.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas like a capitalist conceptualization of tech is like it further alienates us, it further isolates us, where it's like the constant project of constructing myself as an individual, constructing myself as a brand. And I know that I'm saying this as an adult, but I'm sure that children pick up on this. It only leads to like further and further feeling isolated, feeling lonely, and feeling like not a part of something at all. And no matter how much I get, no matter how many brand deals or followers or likes or whatever, like my contribution is sort of ultimately kind of like meaningless or like ephemeral.
It's more about like, what can I get out of this? Like, what can I as an individual get out of this thing that I'm doing? Can I get money out of it? Can I consume? So many kids these days want to be like streamers or like YouTubers or podcasters, not because they're like, I want to contribute to society and make the world a better place, but because they think that's probably like a fun job that you can have and you can make a lot of money. Like there's basically no like ceiling.
And also be so for real, like our social relations under capitalism are so intensely atrophied that I also think it like probably seems like, and I would like have friends.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a whole loneliness epidemic. People are so lonely. People are so bad at generative conflict and at like actually being for real with each other. Like, yeah, capitalism really messes with a lot of things, and it messes with the human psyche a lot. Like we are all so alienated from each other, from our labor, from, you know, all the things. It's a mess. God, I hate capitalism. What a great system. I feel like we would really benefit from a new one.
That about does it for this episode. Thank you so much to you, Revolutionary Thought, and to all of our listeners and Patreon subscribers. The newest ones are Liquidated Bourgeoisie, Wes, Anti-Costerismo, Nova, Brett, Forrest, Zach, Apparently, Nick, Quinn, Genghis Khan, Remarxist, Julian, Sean, Jack, John, Communist Public Accountant, Sean, Trish, Seb, Connor, Hot Bagels, and Tommy. And a very special shout out to our Vanguard patrons, Better Red Than Liberal, The Winking Cossack, Talking Socks, and Comrade Chihuahua. Once again, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do so at patreon.com/ProlesPod for free. If you have questions, comments, or episode ideas, please email us at ProlesPod@outlook.com. Please follow, review, like, all that algorithm stuff, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. May the specter haunt your streets, and solidarity
Forever.